Lob City, I think, is the most influential Clippers team. Let's put it that way. Without Lob City, you're not on the map. I don't know if Steve Ballmer's buying you.
Welcome into Clippers Talk. I'm Adam Oslin. First show of the new week will not be the last one. If you need to get to me, I'm at Follow Adam A on X on Twitter. Now at Clippers Talk on the YouTube side. If you want to be watching this episode, you could also be listening on iHeart. Make it Spotify or iTunes as well. If you just like the podcasting, if you like the vodcasting, and I know Chuck Mockler doesn't like that name, but he will be coming on tomorrow with Will Updike. If you like to watch, go to YouTube. Voyeur away there at Clippers Talk. You can also go there for TikTok. I just put up an update on my body fat percentage earlier today because I'm tying it in with Kawhi Leonard and being motivated by the fact that it looks like he's under 10%, at least going back to last season. So I have a whole universe being built right now around Clippers Talk. And coming up later this week on Friday, a super secret special guest. I don't want to give it away yet. It's too big. It's too big. This is like a gender reveal type thing. This is huge. This is big time. Coming up tomorrow, I mentioned Chuck Mockler and Will Updike. We'll do a little clips and dip here on the Clippers Talk side. On Thursday, it will be brother of Jamal Christopher, twin brother, identical twin, Justin Wilson. At LA Clippers Film is where you'll find him. So a big week of guests, starting with this man joining me now. He may have Jag in his name, but it's not just another guy. He's not a guy at all. He's a Jaguar. It's Mike Jaglin of the Lob, the Jam, the podcast from the 213 Empire joining me here on Clippers Talk. Mike, how are we doing?
You need that. I mean, that is part of, eventually by the end of the season, we'll have that effect built in, But right now, we're just going to roll with what we have. And yes, I am the Jaguar. I've been a part of Clipper Nation for quite some time. And we're heading into another interesting season with a brand new playground.
A lot to discuss with that moving forward. But before that, we're going to take things back a little bit. We were discussing some show topics here today, and I thought you brought up a really interesting one. Talking about which era of Clippers basketball had the bigger championship window between the 2-on-3 era that we just got out of with Paul George now in Philadelphia and the Lob City era from 2012 to 2017-ish. Mike, I'll ask you. I have some thoughts on this, but just where does your mind initially go when asked that question? Who had a better chance or who had a larger window of success if it wasn't for all the unfortunate bad luck when it came to injuries and other things?
Yes, I mean, Clipper PTSD is another thing, but it's really interesting because if you look at the Lob City era, really there was a moment, and that was in 2014. The Warriors came in for a preseason game. Alvin Gentry was the assistant coach on the Clippers the year before. He ended up going up to the Bay. Talks about how he got his car stolen in San Francisco, but he loves his team. And then we go out and we watch this game, and Clay and Steph are on another level. This is just a preseason game. You knew something was up because this was Kerr's first year. And from that point on, they were kind of chasing the Warriors. They never had outside of the 2014 matchup in the first round. They never met until 2019, but during the Lob City era, that was it. And, I think we all thought as Clipper fans, or we hoped for, that this was going to be the opportunity and the window that they had. Unfortunately for them, not only did you have the Warriors, you had OKC, and you had the Spurs. And then James Harden, we know about what happened with the Rockets. So the West was such a crapshoot. I remember that 2015 year, it was up to, the final day for like the top 6 seeds. And, at first you thought Lob City was the team that would probably do it. Now, Lob City, I think, is the most influential Clippers team. Let's put it that way. Without Lob City, you're not on the map. I don't know if Steve Ballmer's buying you. It put this team, in the forefront, especially from a marketing standpoint. Because Blake was big with Kia, CP's always been big with State Farm. But from a true title standpoint, 2-3 had that. We can say that the injuries took it away, but they had that window, I think, stronger than Lob City did. Basically, that bubble year, if it's not in the bubble, there's a good chance they win that title. But I think, breaking down in the bubble was not good. And then, Kawhi going down the next year when, they probably end up facing Milwaukee in the finals. And they probably get there. So I think even going back to last year when they were playing so great in January and they were contending for the top seed in the West, we had hope, right? I think with Lob City, you had everything that what happened in 2014 with OKC and the meltdown there. You have the meltdown, up 3-1 and up, 20 points against the Rockets in Game 6. And then, then the next year, Chris and Blake in the same game end up basically leaving side by side, getting hurt and injured after they were up 2-0. So, I mean, again, a lot of Clipper issues with health from both sides. It's always been kind of somewhat of a thorn in the Clipper side, in the Clipper ship. But I would say 2-3, from that. Now, do I like the 2-3 era more than the Lob City? Not necessarily. I think the Lob City, even though it had issues and friction probably, I mean, look what it's churned out in regards to like media figures too. I mean, you're talking JJ, and now he's a coach of the Lakers. You're talking Jamal, who's probably going to be elevated on that TNT staff. Matt Barnes' podcast and media empire are growing.
All the smoke,
yeah. So I think that team was the most influential and really, really did a great job of kind of just falling into, post basketball. But again, once the Warriors took command, it would have been great to play them in 2015, but I still don't think that team was deep enough to beat them.
Okay, let's start there then with the Lob City era, because I like the way you outline it. To me, their best two opportunities to win it wasn't 2012. Blake hadn't progressed far enough. They still had Vinny Del Negro as the head coach. And it still kind of baffles my mind that I don't think he's even been an assistant coach since the Clippers let go of him. It's kind of a wild scenario. In 2013, he's still the head coach. I think that 2013 team was really good. The problem was
they didn't run an offense.
Yeah.
They
talent-wise, they had a lot. They didn't have that right head coach, and I would say Blake was still a year early. Then you get to 2014, and they lost to Memphis in the first round.
After being up 2-0. And then
Blake Griffin had the ankle injury.
Yes, after practice.
Right. The same team they beat in 7 games the year before. But that was, at one point, that was probably the best rivalry in the NBA for a second.
Oh, just I love
for
it.
A second. Mm-hmm. I know it's always going to be Lakers, Celtics, and things like that. But I'm saying at that time, that was a really tough.
They hated each other. Yeah. I mean, you had that Zebo factor, he former Clipper. Gasol was all world at that point, and we all know about Mike Conley. They just matched up so well, but they did such a great job just grinding you and dictating the pace, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened in that series. I think that's what happened in that 2013 series. I mean, we were up 2-0. We go to Memphis. We lose 2. Blake gets hurt, and, everything's, kiboshed.
So the year I would identify as this is their best shot because of what you mentioned with the Golden State Warriors was 2014. But that was mired in the Donald Sterling fiasco. Clip just came out on Hulu. You can learn all about it. It was 10 years ago now that Steve Ballmer thankfully took over this organization. But because of that, they still got out of the first round against the Golden State Warriors, who were a year in their last year with Mark Jackson and a year before getting Steve Kerr and making some of those tough decisions with Draymond Green and Andre Iguodala that really vaulted them into being a championship contender while implementing an offense for them that really played to their 2-star strengths in Steph Curry and Klay Thompson then. But 2014 They have a chance to go up 3-2 and a chance to close things out against the OKC Thunder. They're up 7 with 45 seconds left in Game 5. And the basketball gods once again went against them with the out-of-bounds play with Matt Barnes and Reggie Jackson. I felt like fouled CP3 on a play where the ball went out of bounds. They didn't call that either. I had Dime Dropper on recently, and he pointed out the fact that you look back at all the Clippers' failures in the playoffs, and it's amazing that of all the bad calls, it felt like they never got one that swung their way.
If one call goes right in that last 47-ish seconds, they win the game. But everything went wrong. I mean, everything. I mean, in that ball that went off of Barnes, like, you saw the replay, and it's still, and Chris did his patent, I'm going to shoot it from half court, thing. And it was just really tough. Once Jamal missed that layup, it just all went downhill. But I agree. I think 2013 from a true talent standpoint, probably was a better team, but 2014, they had it set up, right? You still have to end up beating San Antonio in the next round,
who was on the get back after losing in the finals the year before when they thought they should have won with the Ray Allen shot in that Game 6 against Miami.
Mm-hmm.
So they were extremely motivated. I don't know if they beat that version of San Antonio. Now, you can make the argument they beat them in the first round the next year in 2015 in 7 games.
It would have been a great series.
2014, it would have at least been interesting. But then in 2015, as you mentioned, the Warriors are on the come up, and they're starting to round into championship form. Now, when the Clippers were up 3-1 in that second round against the Houston Rockets, they actually were the favorites at one point to win the entire thing. When they looked that dominant, when they were up 3-1, even with Golden State winning 67 games that season, the Clippers, for a brief moment of time, were championship favorites before they let that series get away.
Yeah, we were up 3-1, and then I believe they were down 2-1 to Memphis, right? I think Golden State was at that point. And
they struggled against Memphis. Yeah. And they had some injury luck go their way, Golden State, on the way to getting to that championship, not just against the Cleveland Cavaliers, but I believe Drew Holiday was out with the Pelicans, and then Mike Conley went out against Memphis, and that changed that series.
Yep. No, I mean, listen, the Dubs before 2019, they got every break and they ran through the wall. They did.
Now, I don't want to say the Clippers would have beaten them in 2015, but it would have been interesting only because they didn't have that championship reservoir of confidence to draw upon yet, the Golden State Warriors. This is their first year that they're about to win. And by the way, no Kyrie Irving, no Kevin Love for almost the entirety of that NBA Finals against Cleveland. More injury, good fortune on going their way. But I would have at least given the Clippers a chance. Now, you could say, and I think this is what's working against Lob City so much, when we discuss these two eras and the window closing very quickly, it's like the game evolved in real time within just a year or so. Yep. The game changed so much because if they did play Golden State, how much is DeAndre Jordan going to be effective in that series? How much is he going to be able to stay on the floor, one of their most crucial players, when Golden State was pretty consistently already starting to run the opposition center off the floor? That's a problem right there. You can already be missing your third most impactful player. So Doc
would have ridden him out. I mean, he would have.
He would have tried.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, it's the same thing. Like we were in that Trez situation in the bubble. He did the same thing. But DeAndre back then was peak DeAndre, and there were a lot of Warrior fans that at the time were really worried about DeAndre, especially in the first time they matched up, the only time they really matched up in 2014, because they had Bogut at the time. And then again, you make a great point because Golden State had a great year, but they weren't ascending. They were ascending, but they didn't have that confidence yet. And with the bad blood between those two teams, Clippers and the Warriors, coming off that 7-game series a year prior, that at least goes 6. right? That at least goes 6. And, Golden State probably finds a way because, again, their ball movement in prime Golden State time, even though I couldn't stand them, was phenomenal. And
who's guarding Steph and Clay? CP3 is getting worn out. He's having to guard Steph a lot.
And then Thompson's going to go, camp on top of JJ. There's a lot of what ifs but from an entertainment standpoint, I think that was a series that we all deserved. It really was. I mean, and then they ended up blowing out Houston, in 2015. But it's just again, it's Lob City was the most impactful group for the Clippers of any. I think of any team they've had.
Well, it felt like not only were they exciting, and I do think there was an issue there of more style than substance, but there was substance.
Oh, yeah.
They did have guys in a talent level that we really hadn't seen on the Clippers before. I think the 06 team was really good, and they pushed Phoenix to 7 games and easily could have won that series and gone to the conference finals. But I still would probably give 2014 or 2015 Lob City Clippers the edge over them peak-wise, even though a lot of it was built upon flash and athleticism and explosiveness. But Blake in the 2015 playoffs was so good in that series against San Antonio, and then CP3 with the game winner. Of course, he gets banged up right after that, and that also hurt them.
Well, then he misses game 1 against Houston with the hammy injury, and they ended up winning that. The thing that I didn't like, if they would have matched up with Golden State, is they didn't have that depth that they had a year prior in 2014. Right. You had Darren Collison, who was instrumental in the Mother's Day miracle. They had the ghost of Danny Granger, who actually they got enough out of him during that time. And let's not forget, what also Lob City did is really made it at the time a very desirable place for buyout players.
Mm. And Paul Pierce, Grant Hill, were both those guys buyouts? They were at least long in the tooth, end of their career guys, chasing championship type of guys.
And again, the Clippers were never in that conversation before these teams. I mean, you would never think that Grant Hill would choose to come. You would never, it's amazing because they were able to get Glenn Big Davy Davis was a prime example and a very big rotation piece for a couple years.
Yeah. Kenyon Martin was good for them in 2012, of course. He helped them pull through with that Game 7 in Memphis. Yeah, they had guys. There was already some legitimacy now coming to the organization. Then Doc comes. You pair that up with CP3 and Blake. But I would say, at best, you could say there were 3 years where they had a real chance to at least get to the championship, I would say. 2013... I know it's Vinny Del Negro.
But that was the December to remember. They won 17 straight games? Yeah. And they were arguably the best team, in that winter session. And
CP3 has become probably underrated at this point because of the last few years and because of a larger sample size of playoff miscues and disappointments, being up 2-0 against the Milwaukee Bucks in 2021 and fizzling out. But the criticism I always had of him was he wasn't aggressive enough. He wasn't assertive enough with what a good offensive efficient player he was out there. I wanted him to take more shots, honestly.
He needed to. I mean, as much as Blake was a superstar, he did so many things really well, but he didn't have that one thing. And what I always wanted to see with Chris and Blake on a consistent basis was almost like a Stockton and Malone. But a little more, athletic because Blake was, could jump out of a freaking moon. Blake did things really well. He was never that guy that you need a bucket and you go to him.
Yeah.
He wasn't. And that's what that team lacked. That's why Jamal, I think, played such a pivotal role, is Jamal could make instant offense. and not to take away anything from Blake. It's just, you needed Blake with Chris. Blake needed to be the best player on that team for them to win a title.
I think in the same way that the era of basketball shifted so quickly and passed Lob City by a little bit, Blake, by the time his mind caught up with his body, it was already starting to deteriorate. Where instead of seeing him, like that first full year he got with Detroit was a really good season for him, where he showed he could be an offensive system and a hub, and you can play through him. And it's not like we didn't see glimpses of that with the Clippers, where I think he finished third in MVP. Was it 2014 when CP3 missed all that time?
Yep.
We saw glimpses of it, but maybe he never felt like he had the keys because he was playing next to CP3 so much and he wasn't as emboldened. But I think he needed to be the best player too, especially if Chris Paul is not going to look for his offense as much as he probably should, volume-wise, for a guy that's been that efficient his entire career. And by the time Blake started to figure it out, he just ran out of time. His body betrayed him.
Yeah, it was a shame. Because he was the dominant force. He said top 3 in the MVP. He was all NBA pretty consistently for 5 years. And ranked in the top 5 of ESPN's preseason players. Him and Chris one year. It was just a very fun time. Granted, there was friction that came. We all know Sterling. I don't need to reiterate on that, but there have been stories over the years of certain players not getting along. The Blake kind of downfall. When he goes to Toronto and the whole thing happens. With Messias, I think was his name. It was a shame because Blake never. Even though he played with the Celtics at the end, he never got that time to be an impactful bench player, right? He really didn't. And now you're going to see Chris is in a great spot with Wemby. He's going to just be an older version of Chris Paul, and you might have a chance to make the playoffs next year.
You mentioned though Blake, for so long it looked like he didn't have as much of the fundamentals or a bag to go to where he knew, I get to this spot, these are my go-to spots on the floor, these are my go-to moves. But then I think around 2015, his jumper got much more consistent. He wasn't just a dunker anymore, but the injuries just kept piling up more and more. Yeah. Against the Blazers, he's out. Against the Jazz, he's out. It just seems so cruel that a guy that I think was one of the harder workers in the league that wanted to be known for much more than just being a dunker, and he was, but you never got a large chunk of time to really appreciate just how much or how well-rounded his game really was.
Yeah, no, Blake, he's definitely a borderline Hall of Famer. I don't know if he'll get in. But again, he's the one too that basically helped kind of. We talk about Lob City, and we talk about 2-1-3. But if you talk about one player that did something, it was Blake. Getting Blake, was giant. Granted, he gets hurt, knee injury first preseason, and he's out that year. But then he comes back next year, wins Rookie of the Year, and jumps over a car. And it was great seeing this transcend. But again, when it came down to the nuts and bolts of winning a game, especially in crunch time, he didn't have that it factor of I'm going to post this guy up and I'm going to do this. I'm going to come off this little screen and I'm going to hit a jumper. He wasn't that bucket getter that you need to win a title. And Chris was Chris. I agree with you. He probably, in hindsight, should have been more of a scorer. But wow, it was amazing. It was an amazing time, though.
Chris kind of had the skill set you needed, but not the mindset. And it was the other way around, maybe with Blake and some of his shortcomings. So we're in agreement. They had at best a 3-year window, realistically, to at least win a title. And by the way, if you get there, in those years. 2013, you're taking on a Miami team that just won the year before.
Yeah, you're against the Heat.
2014, the same. 2015, LeBron and the Cleveland Cavaliers would be. I actually think that's a decent matchup for them if they could somehow get there. But now 2-1-3. To me, you touched upon it already, but they had a larger window if you forget about the injuries. If you just say on paper they're healthy the last 5 years,
they probably get a chip.
They probably get 2, right?
At least one, at least. Again, like with the my PTSD with this organization, you only take one and you run. But that team, they had it that first year. I think if the pandemic doesn't happen, there's a good chance they end up winning. Because let's be honest too, that year they really had the Lakers number.
I'll say that they won the first 2. The Lakers won the last 2 games.
But wasn't one of them in the bubble?
One of them was the first game. It was the opening game of the bubble, and Kawhi was held on the wrist by LeBron James at the end and was screaming for a foul.
And then didn't PG like chuck up a 3 to try to? Yeah. No, I think that team. They opening night that year. Let's not forget, like PG was on the shelf for like a month. And they went in. And they won that game, with Kawhi and those guys. And it was really impressive. And I think that, even though everything broke well for the Lakers that year in general, that Christmas Day game was amazing.
Down 14 or whatever it was in the second half, the Pat Bev strip of LeBron. That's one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, no, listen, if you look at things leading up, right? They have that momentum, even though in March they were they had those kind of lapses at times. But again, when you're dealing with long seasons in basketball and baseball, you're gonna have that. It's just the way it is. Yeah. Then the pandemic hits, and the bubble just I'll never know what to make of it, because I do feel it did more harm for them because of being up 15 points, in 2 closeout games, and being on the short end of the stick. And that's the thing. Like, the PTSD creeps in, even though, like, the positive side of me, after you lose that game 5, you're like, okay, we had them. We'll come back and get them the next day. And then the same thing happens again. And then game 7 was back and forth for, a minute. And then they ended up running away with it.
I think it was up 16 in game 5, up 19 in game 6, up 12 at one point in game 7. And I understand the pushback of when people say that the Clippers are making excuses, they didn't want to be there. It's like, well, did they want to be there when they were up 3-1? Because they were.
Yeah.
They were up 3-1. They looked comfortable at that point. Maybe they got too comfortable. I do think it's a fluky set of circumstances that definitely played a role. To what extent, we'll never know. I do think that Lakers team
They were great.
Was really good. They finished number one in the West. They were the best team before the pandemic record-wise. But would the Clippers have performed better? Do I think they would have at least gotten to the Western Conference Finals? Yeah. I think the same stuff, though, that was their undoing against Denver, if they played the Lakers and played Montrezl Harrell the same way they did against Denver, it probably ends up in a loss in 6 or 7 games. That strategy was Doc's downfall.
That was the one thing with Doc. Like, he is loyal. His loyalty. It is to a fault. And it's one of those things that he knows what he knows, but he didn't mix it up at all. I think they had Joakim Noah, what was left of him at the time, on the roster. They could have thrown him out there against Jokic. You could have.
I thought he looked all right in a couple minutes here and there in the bubble.
He did, but it was just so tough. Now, in hindsight, too, if the Clippers win in the bubble, we get ridiculed, probably saying that it doesn't count.
If their one championship came in that setting in Orlando, I look at it this way: the Lakers have a hard time getting credit for a championship there,
Yeah,
and they
they're
had
the
already
Lakers.
won 16.
I know, they're the Lakers.
And so the Clippers would have gotten no love, no respect. They would have had to back it up with a win the next season. So that next year, 2021, to me, that's the year.
Mhm.
I've said this before. I have passwords that involve 2021 Clippers won because I felt so strongly they were going to win if Kawhi doesn't go down there. I think while Giannis had gotten better, I still think some of the same stuff that happened against the Raptors with Kawhi in the Eastern Conference Finals in 2019 would have occurred in the NBA Finals too. And that would have been the difference for the Clippers, obviously getting by Phoenix if they have Kawhi, but beating the Milwaukee Bucks to win the whole thing. I feel very confident in that.
No, I do too. I think that would have been a fantastic series. And, it just, again, one of those what ifs, if Kawhi doesn't get Ingles, they have a legitimate chance. I think that team, because that Phoenix series, even without Kawhi, was a lot closer, and it was 6 games. I mean, that game 2, again, one thing I want to tell you, Adam, is Doc Rivers told me years ago. He goes, to win a title, you got to be good, 1, 2, you got to be healthy, and you got to be lucky. And the Suns had a lot of things going for them. Having no Kawhi in that series, and then that alley-oop that Ayton got. I was on the Lob in the Jam after that. I was just like, okay, well, we've been down this street before, and this is not a street we like. It was it was a closer series than most people know.
Oh yeah, down
really
0-2 when it should have been 1-1. It could have been 2-0 the Clippers' way. They could have won the first 2 games.
They could have. And then game 4 was just like both teams were awful.
Yeah.
If someone gets hot, they have a chance to win that game.
Game 6, the Clippers get blown out, and I think some people, surmise a lot from that and just say, okay, this was the Suns beating them handily. Yeah, it went 6, but it was really a 5-game series. But you look at the individual games and contextualize it a little bit, it was much closer than that without Kawhi Leonard.
Mm-hmm.
Also without Ivica Zubac after the game 3.
Yep.
It's a pretty big deal. That's pretty important. Yep. DeMarcus Cousins was a shell of himself. Did he play in the NBA a significant portion of time after that? I don't
he was on the Nuggets the next season, I think. I think he was on the Nuggets, and that was basically it.
So speaking of that next season, they're not before the Nuggets yet, but we both believe the Clippers could have won in 2021 and would have if Kawhi doesn't go down. My point in this hypothetical of what is your window, and did you have a window that was large enough and enough opportunities to win, is level of competition plays a big role to me. I think the 2022 Warriors were plenty vulnerable. I do not think that's a dominant all-time team. I think
they got the breaks. But again, that goes back to the Doc Rivers theory. You got to be lucky. And again, when you're in the playoffs in any sport, all you can do is play who's in front of you. We can say here and talk about hypotheticals because playoffs, as we know too, it comes down a lot of, are you also hot? Are you, what's the matchup like? It was really difficult, for this team, to ever really not have an opportunity if they were healthy to win a title. This was a title team. I mean, and back to 2021, like they picked up Serge. Serge was great, and then he hurts his back. There were, but they still had enough to, in my mind, to get to the finals and possibly beat the Bucks.
That does fly under the radar. They got damaged goods with Serge Ibaka, unfortunately.
They did.
He just never recovered from that back injury.
And we
know how critical of a player he was for the Toronto Raptors when he was right.
And he was critical for the Clippers that first half of the season.
Yeah.
Because that was also, too, people have to look back at that time. You have the big 3 in New Jersey, or not New Jersey, Brooklyn at the time. They're trying that out. They end up basically or Kevin Durant foot on the line away from almost beating the Bucks.
Mm-hmm.
And they never got their due.
They're doing the same thing on our Brooklyn podcast right now, talking about a lost era there and a missed opportunity there. But my point is, there hasn't been a team that has gone back-to-back since the 2017-2018 Golden State Warriors.
Yeah.
The last 5 years, you had a different team win every time. There was a real opportunity there because even the next season, I mentioned Golden State, they win in 2022. I don't think they were an unbeatable team. I don't think Denver was an unbeatable team. I think they played a level of basketball against the Lakers especially that made everyone feel like that they were inevitable, and that's fine. But I would have liked to see the Clippers against them still fully healthy. I would have loved to see that matchup. And then you go back this last year, and the Clippers have to watch a team that I don't think their top two stars ever peaked the way the Clippers have, and they're still young and they can get better. But, they build a team the exact same way that the Clippers had in Boston. They get the breaks, they get the good health, and they go on to win it this season. And I don't think they won it with a top 5 player.
I agree with you. They are lucky that, they're good and they're a really well-run organization, the Boston Celtics. But the East doesn't have the consistent parity that the West does. The West, you can make an argument that the Heat were an 8 seed and they did that, but again, these matchups aren't like what they are in the West. I mean, it's a bloodbath. But getting back to what you said, that being there isn't one dominant team anymore, and that I think bodes well for Clipper fans moving forward into the Intuit Dome. That if things maybe break their way a little bit, I do firmly believe that the Clippers have a playoff team. I don't know where they'll finish or if they'll be in the play-in, but it's just really interesting. It really is Double A.
I'd have to say, to put a conclusion to this question, who had the bigger window between 2-1-3 and Lob City, I think all 5 years of the Clippers are healthy in the 2-1-3 era. Mm-hmm. They have a more legitimate shot than any of the 3 years we said Lob City had a good opportunity to win. I think it's pretty heavily favored in favor of the 2-1-3 era.
I think it is, and again,
which makes it much more disappointing.
Yeah, I know, but but this is cool that we can, as Clipper fans and Clipper historians, whatever you want to call us, we're actually talking about Clipper history. We couldn't have this conversation in 2010. You know what I mean?
That's true.
We couldn't. And now, with what Ballmer's done, and sure, we can go back and if you don't get Jerome Robinson and you get someone else, maybe that person's shipped out to OKC and SGA's still here. But it's a prized organization now, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of go through the waters. With a competitive team, but not a team that screams title contender. But again, the West isn't the scariest thing in the world.
I guess the question of, is it better to have never loved at all or loved and lost? The Clippers went from not loving at all to having loved and lost. They had real teams with skin in the game that had a chance to win a championship. And we're putting together about 8 years where we say these two different eras had a chance. They couldn't get it done, but I would rather be in this situation than going into each year saying, can we just, win 30 games or whatever it was back in the day.
Or just sniff the playoffs, Yeah. I mean, what, you go 94 and then 92 and then you go to 2006, those are bleak times. There's still a lot of season ticket holders from those sports arena days that, witnessed a lot. I mean, again, people have to realize, especially newer Clipper fans, that, this was not a well-run organization under, Diamond Don. It wasn't. He didn't care. He was a very
Zarkonian.
Yeah,
Cuban zirconian dog.
exactly. And you have Ballmer, who all the guy wants to do is win. That's all he wants to do. And now we have the state-of-the-art palace. They're going to try to sniff around and figure out if they can get someone else there. I mean, I don't know who they could get. Zach LaVine, maybe, but to stay on this window of Kawhi and Harden.
Cubic zirconia.
Cubic zirconia. Well,
I was thinking of ownership, and I had Mark Cuban on the mind there for a second. Okay, so we got another hypothetical here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a prediction. We're not looking back. We're looking a little bit into the future of who could be the first guys to have their jersey retired at Intuit Dome. Who are the handful of Clippers greats that should have that enviable distinction? Who's the first guy?
It has to be Blake.
Yeah.
You have to lead off with Blake. He was the most instrumental Clipper in history.
Transformative.
Yeah. And what he was able to do, put us on the map, so it has to be Blake. Hopefully this year they figure out a way to make this happen. Then after that, I still think DJ needs to get in once he retires. He was just too much. Again, a player that the Clippers never had in the past. A guy that was all NBA defense, all NBA center, Olympian, a Clipper won an Olympic gold. It's like ever since that it's Blake gets hurt at in 2012 at the Olympic training, and then Kawhi has everything that happens this summer. So DJ's been the only one, and I just feel that he was just such a big part of the Clippers and homegrown guys too, right? So then we go talk about the other guys that have a legit argument. CP3, we know that was big for the organization.
I don't care how much Clipper fans, there's a faction of them, I get why, that disdain him now because he's just one of those guys. When he's on your team, you root for him. When he's not, he becomes the enemy pretty quickly because of some of the antics. He still is way too important to this organization not to have his number retired.
And that was part of the thing too. Over the last couple off seasons, we've heard rumblings of possibly CP coming back. And as a Clipper fan, and I would welcome that back any day of the week, because I feel like he probably had his CP3 peak as a Clipper, right? He goes to Phoenix, and Booker finally develops. You have Bridges, you have Ayton.
If the Rockets, if he didn't get hurt with Houston, they had beaten the Golden State Warriors, then you could say that was the pinnacle of his career.
Yes, but again, he got hurt. But that was peak Chris Paul, because you have to think, like 2008, he has a phenomenal playoffs with New Orleans. They battled, almost beat San Antonio, but didn't. Blew a
they get smoked in that game 7 by like 40. I don't even know how that happened.
Yeah. And
they were good.
And then he goes to the Olympics, and then the trade that didn't happen to the Lakers, and then he comes over to the Clippers, and it was kind of poetic justice, because that was kind of like the Clippers ship has sailed in to the port they want to be in, and the Lakers are like, well. You can't be at that port. That port shouldn't exist. We had him. And it's like, no. We've gone through so many storms as a franchise. Just give us this, you Laker haters.
That was one of the few times the basketball gods smiled upon the Clippers. He might have, I heard this on a pod recently, the biggest shot in franchise history. The shot over Tim Duncan.
Oh, for sure.
Just by a hair, by like an inch, a fingernail, to get that to go on a bad hammy is incredible in that game 7.
No, I totally agree with you. I think that was the biggest shot in Clipper history for sure. I mean, again, that if they lose that game, it's they're the Clippers, but they kept us in a good good shape into the next series until we saw what happened. But I think Chris Paul does deserve it when he finally does. You could probably argue he's going to get his jersey retired by multiple teams, as he probably should. But I want to ask you now, CP not homegrown, and the other two that I think had probably their not. It was probably they might not have been at their peak at their game, but they won Sixth Man of the Year is Crawford and Lou Williams. So you have an argument with these two because they actually played their best ball, winning an award that, I don't think the Clippers before Jamal ever had a Sixth Man of the Year.
Did Jamal win 3 with the Clippers? Or did he win 2? And 1, I'm getting a little bit confused. I'm like, did Jamal win 1 with Atlanta? Or did Lou Williams win 1 with Atlanta?
Lou won 1 with Atlanta. I know that. Did Lou win 2 with the Clippers, or was it 1?
Ooh. Montrez
let me look
snuck in for 1 in the 2019-2020 season. I want to say Jamal has 4 total.
Yes, he okay, I'm pulling this up as we speak.
Needless to say, oh yeah. I would
Man of the Year. He did okay. So he wins in 2010. He won for the Hawks too.
They both did.
Yeah, they both did. And then he wins in 2014 and 2016. So I think you gotta look at Jamal. I think really closely. And
I'm fine with it.
Yeah,
I'm good with it. You have 2 of the best at what they 2 of the best 6 men in NBA history. And that's an important role. And entertainers with the way they got buckets.
And let's not forget, Adam, like you go through Lob City, you think as like, a sports historian or a person that follows it, you're going to have to go through a rebuild. And they were able to do really well on that CP3 trade, getting Trez and Lou, and basically seemingly like just going through the rebuild as just kind of, a retooling. And that's what happened. They were actually able to retool the frame of their franchise kind of on the fly, and then they bring in Kawhi and PG. So
those 2 bridge years are all-timers. You can say it.
Best Doc coaching jobs, by far.
Oh, yeah. I always felt like, same with Orlando, he did best when he was looked at as overachieving, when he took lesser teams further than people thought they would go. I think it goes the other way for him, though, also. He took teams that people expected to go further.
Yeah.
They underperformed at times. But, yeah, that season with Blake being traded to Detroit, the 2017-2018 year, and they still won 42 games, I don't know how they pulled that off. And then the special 2018-2019 season with Trez, Pat Bev, Sweet Lou, SGA, Shamet hitting the shot against the Golden State Warriors. That's probably my favorite season.
But again,
they
we
maximize
had no rebuild. That's, I think, what Clipper fans actually have to realize. Like, there really hasn't been a lull in Steve Ballmer's tenure. We haven't had that bottom out to that extent. You know what I mean? And right now we're, like I said, I think we're a playoff team, but we're not bottoming out.
Well, more on that coming up. Yeah, 12 straight winning seasons. That is the longest streak currently in the NBA. It was the San Antonio Spurs for so long. Okay, so we mentioned we both have Sweet Lou Williams and Jamal Crawford in as jerseys to retire. And other franchises, they could look down on this stuff. You have to look at how far the Clippers have come.
Yep.
I know these guys have not won championships with the organization. That team, that entire team that does it first might have a statue outside for each individual player because it would be so meaningful to this organization.
Oh, you'd put the entire team out there as a statue. Yeah. No, I agree.
They went from having not just an unserious owner, but someone who was a detriment to the ball club for over 40 years. When you mention ownership being the biggest advantage in sports, they were at a disadvantage for over 40 years. I usually say, Mike, that you got to look at this Clippers team really as, in some ways, only being around for a decade since they got Steve Ballmer, and just look at how they progressed since then.
Again, I think it goes back to Blake. I think Blake is the one pivotal moment that this helps catapult you into being a respectable franchise.
Yeah.
A franchise that people actually want to take the minimum and go. The buyouts want to come. That stuff never happened, and Blake really helped that. I mean, Blake was, I don't know if CP had much of a choice of where he was going to go in that trade, but he was excited for the idea of Blake and DJ.
I'm going to give you a couple other names I think that should have their jerseys retired. Somebody who doesn't get talked about enough, that's the all-time scoring leader in Clippers franchise history, Randy Smith. I know he didn't have many big moments. They weren't making the playoffs, but he was consistent for them for a long time.
I have nothing against Randy Smith. He was, a big part of this franchise. The problem was it was, the sports arena days, and it's tough. It's tough. What did you? Elton Brand would have been one if he didn't pull his little game, don't you think?
Yeah,
he was close. He was close.
Is it still too soon, or has enough time passed where he can be forgiven for that?
I mean,
because I think I was going back and watching some of those playoff games against Denver and against Phoenix in 2006, and just admiring how dominant Elton was. Where at his best, he looked easily like a top 10 player in the league. He was a force on the inside. It had a special touch around the basket and physicality to him that really his prime was also so short-lived because of the Achilles tear. It's unfair to him. But at his best, he was just he was an impact player that I think has gone very much underrated within the landscape of the NBA the last 25 years. His name doesn't get brought up a lot.
No, and he was on one of the greatest college teams to never win a title too. The '99 Duke team. Elton had that, right? He has that, and then it just goes.
Yeah,
and he's never really made, I think, an effort to kind of really come back into the organization. He was in the Sixers front office. I don't know if he still is, but he was for years.
He is.
He's still there, right?
He got bumped a little bit.
Yeah,
with what's his name coming in from Houston.
And that's the thing. Like with Elton Brand, like he had that run in with the 2006 team. And 2017 probably should have made the playoffs, and then they didn't. And then the Warriors end up beating the Mavericks in the first round.
Because the Mavs tanked late in the year against Golden State. It kept the Clippers from getting that A spot and came back to haunt them with the 8-1 upset with the We Believe Warriors team. They had it coming. I'd lean towards putting him in. I'd lean towards retiring his jersey. I
would rather put Cassell in over. I
love Sam. I love Sam. I am Cassell. Can we put them both in? Here's the guy. I'll put this guy in before both of them.
Who?
Corey Maggette. Corey Maggette was there for 8 years.
He was there for 8 years, but again, like he wasn't. I don't know. Listen, I love Corey. I've interviewed him a number of times. Great player, just a class act. But yeah, it's tough because they didn't win. They didn't get to the Western Conference Finals. They didn't get to the finals.
No, but he was Mr. Consistent for almost a decade for them.
And he if you look at what he did with his game of going and drawing fouls, he really paved the way for Harden with that.
He did.
He did.
I felt like his were more legit though. Like he really would just
he's running through
first towards the rim.
Yeah, he's running through things. He's not bouncing off things.
How about a Clippers MVP winner and Bob McAdoo? I know it's Buffalo.
I think you have to do that just out of respect.
Yeah.
Right?
And I love when they would do the throwbacks and retro jerseys for
I love them.
Braves.
I love those retros.
Anybody we missing here?
No, we touched on Cassell. Not enough, again, a great year. The legend of Benoit Benjamin. No. There's so many. That's the thing, Adam. Like, there's so many random guys. Like, you could have said Danny Manning, but then
they had his best years probably.
They did, and then they had the end of Dominique.
Yeah, for like 20 games, but he
he
was
was
getting buckets.
the human highlight paused at that juncture of his career. But it's just we're in a good spot. We just came up with a good list of people that should get in the rafters in the next 5 years.
There's one more, and I know he was ravaged by injuries as a Clipper, but because of what he meant to the game, I would consider Bill Walton.
I would consider Bill Walton. I would retire Bill Walton's number
because that's bigger than just the Clippers, and this guy was on.
He was basketball. He was he was and he was alongside Ralph for years. I mean, I went to Ralph's retirement party, and Bill Walton shows up with a bunch of old stuff of his to give to Ralph. And he's looking for what he's looking for, and he pulls out this giant bag of bolts from all of his surgeries. And, oh, this isn't it. These are my bolts. I think this was the right knee. And that was Bill Walton, Oh, God bless him. He was amazing.
We miss him. Okay. If we missed anybody, put them in the comment section below here. Now, you talked about this season. You're optimistic about it, I think. This is another retooling to some degree while still having a lot of high-end talent, 2 top 75 players with Kawhi, with James Harden.
Yep.
What's the best they can do this season with the roster constructed as it is today?
I think the best you can do with what we have right now is probably making sure you stay away from the play-in. I think that's the most realistic, honestly. And that's probably saying you get a healthy Kawhi, you get a healthy Harden. I think you get underneath that apron. But again, you just don't know. There are so many different variables in the West. I mean, I talked earlier about San Antonio. Is Wemby going to take his shot? Then that's another spot that's up. There's not much margin for error. That being said, there isn't that dominant team, like you said.
Memphis will be back in the fold.
Yes.
Houston's going to be better. I think they're going to be really close on the standings to the Clippers. We know what that means for their draft pick. So that's going to be an interesting development. They play each other 4 times this season, too. Outside of Portland, you
don't have any gimmies.
Yeah.
You don't. But again, if they make a move, and they are able to get some other cog to go with them, they could, get the breaks to actually make a run. I mean, that being said, I don't know who they're going to get or if they're going to get anybody, but I really like this team. I think this is a very solid defensive-minded team now. I think that's what they really kind of gravitated to, bringing in, Jones, bringing Nico back. It feels like they know that they're going to miss that PG offense and defense to a certain extent. So you gravitate and you bring in Chris Dunn, another defensive-oriented guy. So, I think that's going to be their identity this year, Adam. I really do.
Oh, yeah, it has to be. If they're going to get the 6th spot, stay out of the play-in, it has to start on the defensive end. They have to be, I would say, at least 8th defensively.
Yeah.
At a minimum. It's not going to be easy. They have 16 back-to-backs. I'm almost assuming at this point Kawhi is going to miss 16 games at least because of that right off the top. So they're going to have a little bit of that luck and good fortune.
And they have to get off to a good start. You got to get off to a good start. Like that's been one of the Clippers' issues in the past. Just as with Lob City, with 2-3, like get that cushion. Get a cushion. If you're able to get a cushion, it's going to make your life a lot easier as you do have Kawhi out, as you do have possibly Harden out.
Yeah.
So I'm excited though. I think this is going to be a really fun year, and no true expectations besides a nice new playground to go to.
Let's talk about that. I know you haven't been there yet.
I haven't been. You got to take me.
I'll try to get you in. I'll sneak you in the back door. It'll be like getting into the theater.
It's the Jaguar.
You go in stealth style.
I know.
How, for those that believe in some type of curse, how is it exercised? Is there some sage that
Is
needs
there
to be brought in?
shays, a witch doctor? I think that's a segment that we should almost like try to figure out if we can can we reach out? Is there a local spiritual person that follows their podcast that can come on and volunteer their services to go to Intuit and make sure that place is nice and clean?
I think Miss Cleo knows I'm already going to have her on. I think she already knows that. So.
Good.
I could have somebody who is the woman from Thinner.
But I think it's a really interesting thing because there's been so many bad things that have happened in this franchise that you want a clean break into the new digs.
Maybe that's all it takes. Getting out of Figueroa.
Well,
if they win any times,
the 1230s are gone, so that's great.
There's already that in their favor.
I know. So
if they win any time in the next 5 years, and it feels like a magical run, everyone's going to point to it was Staples and Crypto all along. That's
it was the house that Kobe built,
and the other two arenas before that. But whatever, it was all that stuff. I'm not a big curse guy because I look at Boston, the Red Sox overcoming it. How do they do so? They just
look at the Cubs did it.
Cubs did. They just
it's all doable. Again, the Doc Rivers. You got to be good, healthy, and lucky.
It was good to have you on. You look healthy, and we were lucky to have you today here on Clippers Talk, Mike.
Oh, you are the best, Double A. And anytime you need me, just give me a holler.
My guy. This is not the only episode this week. Tomorrow, programming note, we got Chuck Mockler and Will Updike, some clips and dip here on Clippers Talk. On Thursday, we'll also have Justin Wilson, brother of Jamal Christopher, who we had on last week. And then Friday, a special guest. I will not tell you who it is yet. But
Clipper Daryl. No.
Slightly higher profile. All the love to Clipper Daryl. Hope he's doing well. We'll see him at the Intuit Dome.
Yeah, we will.
The blue and red suit. This has been fun, though. Appreciate Mike Jaglin, the Jaguar, for coming on. Follow him at Mike Jaglin 24. What's the 24 for? Is that for Kobe's second number?
No. It's so funny. I just one of these numbers that I've kind of gravitated on but it has nothing to do with Kobe. That's
it was our own prime years back when we were 24. It's just
exactly.
One of I love the number 21 is one of my favorites.
Is it? Oh yeah.
You're playing a little bit of roulette. You got 21.
I like it.
Good fortune here today to have Mike Jaglin on. For Mike Jaglin, I'm Adam Oslin. This has been another edition of Clippers Talk. Love you guys.